Have you ever noticed how, no matter how many guns you own, you always end up shooting 22s the most? Maybe it's because they're cheap, maybe it's because they're fun, or maybe, just maybe, it's because there are some truly bizarre 22 rifles out there that make you stop and say, wait, what the hell is that? Now, I've been collecting and shooting for a long time, and I thought I'd seen it all. But every once in a while, a rifle pops up that makes me do a double take. That's exactly what today's video is about. 22 rifles so strange, so rare, or just plain weird that you probably didn't even know they existed. And trust me, some of these are real head-scratchers. Over the years, I've spent a ridiculous amount of time tracking down these oddities, and today, I'm going to walk you through some of the most unique ones I've found. From forgotten designs to some that make you question what the engineers were thinking, each of these rifles has something special about it. Some have clever feeding mechanisms, some have features that were ahead of their time, and some are just, well, bizarre in the best way possible. So buckle up because we're about to take a deep dive into the world of weird 22s. And by the end of this video, I guarantee you'll walk away with a new appreciation for the creativity, and sometimes insanity, behind these forgotten firearms. Let's get into it. The Winchester Model 55. Alright, let's kick things off with a rifle that took me forever to find, the Winchester Model 55. Now, I thought I had a pretty solid grasp on 22 rifles, but this one caught me completely off guard. It's one of those guns that makes you do a double take because at first glance, something about it just seems off. And once you start messing with it, that feeling only gets stronger. The first thing that stands out, there's no visible ejection port. That's right. No obvious way for a spent shell to come flying out. It's the kind of design that makes you question everything you thought you knew about semi-auto 22s. Here's how it works. You pull back the bolt handle, and right away you hear a satisfying little click. That's when you realize the rifle loads from a hidden chamber. Push a 22 round into the gate, and it slides right into place like it was meant to be there. And just like that, you're ready to fire. Now here's where things get weird. When you depress the loading gate, you're also engaging the safety, which automatically clicks into place. And I know what some of you are thinking. Automatic safeties are the worst. I don't like them either, but that's just part of the Winchester Model 55 experience. Fire a round and the bolt flies back, ejecting the spent shell in a way that's almost too smooth for something designed nearly a century ago. So why did Winchester make this rifle? Honestly, I have no idea. It's rare, it's unusual, and it's one of those guns that only the most dedicated 22 collectors even know about. If they had made more of them, maybe it would have become more mainstream. But instead, it's just this little mystery piece in Winchester's history. A beautifully over-engineered, hard-to-find oddball that makes you appreciate how much thought went into gun design back in the day. Mine is in pretty decent shape, though you don't come across these often, and when you do, they're not cheap. The Winchester butt plate is still intact, and the action runs like a dream. And if you're wondering about accuracy, let me put it this way. Even after decades of use, this thing shoots as straight as anything else in my collection. I love collecting unique 22s, but what's crazy to me is how many guys out there collect only 22s. And I'm talking about serious collectors. People with guns going back to the 1800s, with knowledge so deep they could probably school most gun historians. It was those kinds of guys who put me onto the next rifle we're going to talk about, the Remington Model 34. And let me tell you, if you appreciate clever engineering, you're going to love this one. The Remington Model 34. When 22 rifles first hit the market, one of the biggest challenges was getting them to feed properly. It sounds simple, but if you've ever dealt with a finicky 22 that jams every other shot, you know exactly what I mean. That's why certain designs stood out as real game changers, and the Remington Model 34 is one of them. This rifle was made in the 1930s, and back then, getting a 22 to feed reliably was almost an art. Unlike today's guns that are mass-produced with standardized parts, these old-school rifles had mechanisms that were meticulously designed to work with multiple types of 22 ammo, shorts, longs, and long rifles. And the Model 34? It does that flawlessly. The secret is in the feeding system. Most 20s back then had trouble aligning rounds properly, which led to jams. But the Model 34 has a lifting mechanism that ensures each round is perfectly positioned before being chambered. And I mean perfectly. Even after all these years, the action on this rifle is smooth as butter. It's one of those guns that just feels right when you cycle it. For comparison, take a look at the Winchester 1890, a gun that was also designed with reliable feeding in mind. It uses a controlled feed mechanism where the round sits in a separate component before being chambered. The Model 34 takes a similar approach but refines it even further. And the results speak for themselves. Now, when I first got my hands on this rifle, I wanted to test just how well it could handle mixed ammo. So I loaded up some shorts, longs, and long rifles, just to see if I could trip it up. And you know what? It cycled all of them without a hitch. That's impressive, especially for a rifle that's pushing 90 years old. The one I have isn't in perfect condition. There are some scratches, and someone pinned the stock at some point. But honestly, I don't care. This rifle has history, and it still shoots just as accurately as any modern bolt-action .22. Before filming this video, I took it out to see how it stacked up against some of my newer rifles, and I was blown away by how tight the groups were. The Remington Model 34 is one of those guns that makes you appreciate old-school craftsmanship. It's reliable, it's accurate, and if you ever come across one, I'd highly recommend picking it up. But if you thought this rifle had an interesting feeding mechanism, wait until you see the next one. Because the Gevarm Open Bolt .22 takes everything you think you know about semi-auto rifles and flips it on its head. The Gevarm Open Bolt .22. Alright, now we're getting into the real oddities. If you're not familiar with the Gevarm Open Bolt .22, don't feel bad. Most people haven't even heard of it. And that's because it's one of the rarest and most unusual rimfire rifles ever made. Most semi-auto rifles fire from a closed bolt. You pull back the charging handle, a round gets chambered, and when you pull the trigger, the bolt moves forward and fires the round. Pretty standard stuff. But the Gevarm? It flips that entire concept upside down. This rifle fires from an open bolt, meaning the bolt locks back after every shot, and when you pull the trigger, the bolt slams forward, picks up a round, and fires it all in one motion. It's the same principle you see in submachine guns, but in a civilian .22 rifle. And let me tell you, firing one is a bizarre experience. When I first picked up this rifle, I had to stop and think for a second. Pulling the bolt back doesn't chamber a round like you'd expect. It actually puts the gun in the ready-to-fire position. And that's where things get counterintuitive. Once that bolt is locked back, all you have to do is pull the trigger, and the whole mechanism snaps forward, fires around, and cycles back into place, ready for the next shot. It's one of those things that feels completely unnatural until you get used to it. Now, some folks have asked me about the legal status of open-bolt firearms, and I'll be honest, it's a bit of a gray area. In some places, open-bolt designs are heavily restricted because of how easily they can be modified for full auto operation. But this is just a .22, so it doesn't quite fall into the same category as, say, an open-bolt MAC-10. Still, it's an unusual enough design that it raises eyebrows. These rifles are nearly impossible to find. I own one in .22 long rifle and another in .22 short, and I probably know fewer than a dozen collectors who have ever even seen one in person. If you ever come across one, grab it, because chances are you won't see another. Now, before we move on to the really bizarre stuff, I have to mention a few other .22 rifles that, while not as strange as the ones we've covered, still deserve a spot in the conversation. These are guns that solved the feeding issue in their own unique ways and became legends because of it. Take the Winchester 1890. This was one of the first rifles to really get the .22 feeding system right. It's a pump-action design that holds the cartridge securely in place before chambering it, preventing the kind of misalignment that plagued so many early rimfire rifles. Even today, if you ever get the chance to shoot one, you'll be amazed at how smooth it runs. Then there's the Marlin 39, another lever-action classic. This thing cycles shorts, longs, and long rifles with ease, just like the Remington Model 34. It's no surprise that people still collect and shoot these rifles 100 years after they were made. And speaking of lever actions, the Winchester 94-22 is another favorite, though I'm still kicking myself for not picking one up when they were more affordable. These rifles may not be as rare as the Winchester Model 55 or the Remington Model 34, but they represent the best of classic .22 design. They paved the way for what we have today: proving that feeding a rimfire cartridge reliably isn't as easy as it looks. Now, for our last rifle of the day, we're going to take a look at something a little more traditional, but still worth talking about. Let's check out the Rossi Pump Action 22. The Rossi Pump Action 22s. To wrap things up, I want to talk about a rifle that's not necessarily bizarre, but it is often overlooked, the Rossi Pump Action 22s. Rossi has been making guns for a long time, and while they're not always considered collector's items, their Pump Action 22s have a reputation for being rock solid. If you're someone who loves the feel of an old-school slide-action rifle but doesn't want to spend a fortune on a Winchester 1890, this is a fantastic alternative. What makes it special is how well it cycles ammo. Just like the other rifles we've covered, it handles 22 shorts, longs, and long rifles interchangeably without a hiccup. You can mix and match different ammo types in the same tube magazine, and it'll just keep running. Mine has never given me a single problem, and that's impressive considering how finicky some 22 rifles can be. The action is smooth, the trigger is decent, and the accuracy is more than good enough for plinking or small game hunting. It's just one of those rifles that quietly does its job without any drama. I know we've covered some truly bizarre guns today, but I wanted to end on this one because while it may not be rare or strange, it's a perfect example of why 22 rifles are so much fun. They don't need to be expensive or complicated, they just need to work. And the Rossi Pump Action 22 does exactly that. Now let's wrap this up. So there you have it. Some of the most bizarre, rare, and downright fascinating 22 rifles you've probably never seen before. From the Winchester Model 55 with its hidden ejection system to the Remington Model 34's genius feeding design, all the way to the Gevarm Open Bolt 22 that defies every expectation, each of these rifles has something unique to offer. What I love about guns like these is that they remind us just how much thought, innovation, and, let's be honest, sometimes outright madness went into firearm design over the years. Some of these ideas stuck around and became industry standards, while others faded into obscurity, only to be rediscovered by collectors and enthusiasts like us. But now I want to hear from you. Which one of these rifles blew your mind the most? Do you own any rare or unusual 22s that deserve some recognition? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. And if you enjoyed this video, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and consider supporting the channel on Patreon. It helps keep the content coming, and trust me, I've got plenty more weird and rare guns to cover. Until next time, keep your aim steady, your ammo stocked, and your curiosity alive. I'll see you in the next one.